One woman sat quietly in seat 27A. She said nothing. She asked for nothing. 2 hours later, she landed the plane alone, with her own 2 hands, while the captain sat beside her, unable to fly. Then an air marshal leaned close and whispered her old call sign. Hawk. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Flight AK-209 left Karachi at 6 in the morning. The sky was still gray. The sun had not fully come up yet. Inside the plane, 180 passengers found their seats and settled in for a normal day. Some of them closed their eyes to sleep more. Some opened books. A young mother tried to calm her baby. An old man in seat 9C asked for extra water and thanked the flight attendant with a small smile. Nobody on that plane thought this day would be different from any other day. In seat 27A, near the window, sat a woman named Meher Ali. She wore a plain black jacket and simple jeans. Her hair was tied back in a low bun. She carried only one small bag, which she placed under the seat in front of her. She did not talk to the person next to her. She did not open her phone. She simply looked out the window at the clouds and stayed quiet. If you had walked past her, you would not have noticed her at all. She looked like any other tired traveler going to work, or going home, or going nowhere in particular. Nobody knew her name. Nobody knew what she had once been trained to do. She kept that part of her life folded away, the same way she had folded her jacket and placed it beside her bag. The captain of the flight was a man named Imran Sheikh. He was 50 years old and had been flying planes for 26 years. He was known among his crew as a calm man, a man who never raised his voice, a man who trusted his training completely. Beside him in the right seat was the first officer, a younger man named Bilal Khan. Bilal was 31 years old. He had joined the airline 4 years earlier and was still learning from senior pilots like Imran. The two men had flown together many times before. They trusted each other. The cockpit that morning was quiet and calm, just the soft sound of engines and the low hum of instruments. The plane climbed higher into the sky. It reached its cruising height of 35,000 feet. The seatbelt sign turned off. Flight attendants began to move through the cabin, offering tea, coffee, and small breakfast trays. Everything felt ordinary. Everything felt safe. The passengers relaxed into their seats, and the plane moved smoothly through clear morning air, heading toward its destination 2.5 hours away. 40 minutes into the flight, First Officer Bilal Khan told Captain Imran that he was going to the washroom. This was a normal thing. Pilots take turns leaving the cockpit for short breaks, and there is always someone watching the controls. Bilal walked out through the cockpit door, and a flight attendant locked it behind him, as required by safety rules. He walked toward the back of the plane, past rows of passengers reading or resting. He never came back. A young flight attendant named Sarah was serving drinks near row 20 when she heard a sound behind her. It was not loud. It was a soft, heavy thump, like something falling. She turned around and saw First Officer Bilal Khan lying on the floor of the aisle. His eyes were closed. His face had gone pale. For 1 second, Sarah froze completely, unable to move. Then her training took over her body before her mind could even catch up. She knelt beside him and called his name. He did not answer. She checked for breathing. It was there, but it was very weak and uneven. She looked up and shouted for help, and within seconds, 2 more flight attendants rushed toward her. The senior flight attendant on the plane was a woman named Naila. She had worked in the airline for 15 years and had handled many small emergencies before, spilled drinks, sick passengers, crying children. But when she saw Bilal on the floor, not moving, barely breathing, she understood in one glance that this was different. She told Sarah to bring the emergency medical kit and the oxygen tank. She told another attendant to ask if any doctor was on board. Then she picked up the intercom phone and called the cockpit directly. Captain Imran answered on the second ring. Naila's voice was steady but urgent. She told him that First Officer Bilal Khan had collapsed in the aisle and was unconscious. Captain Imran felt his chest tighten, but he did not let his voice shake. He asked her clearly if Bilal was breathing. She said yes, but weakly. He asked if any medical professional had come forward yet. She said they were checking now. Captain Imran put down the phone and sat alone in the cockpit for a moment. He looked at his instruments. He looked at the empty seat beside him where his first officer should have been sitting. He was now the only pilot in control of a large plane carrying 180 passengers and crew, flying at 35,000 feet, more than an hour away from any airport. He took one slow breath. Then he switched the autopilot to hold his current course and altitude, and he began doing what he had trained his whole life to do. He stayed calm. He picked up the radio and called air traffic control. His voice was steady and clear as he explained the situation. He said his first officer was down and unable to fly, and that he was now managing the aircraft alone. He requested priority handling and asked for the nearest suitable airport for an emergency landing. The controller on the ground responded quickly, giving him a new heading and telling him that emergency services would be ready. The controller's final words were simple. "You are not alone up there. We are with you the whole way." Back in the cabin, the news that something serious was happening began to spread quietly among the passengers. They saw the flight attendants moving quickly. They saw the oxygen tank being carried down the aisle. Some passengers whispered to each other. A woman a few rows away began to pray softly. The old man in seat 9C gripped the armrest a little tighter. Nobody panicked loudly, but a heavy, silent worry settled over the cabin, the kind of worry that comes when people sense something is wrong but do not yet know how wrong it really is. Captain Imran's voice came over the speakers a few minutes later. He spoke slowly and clearly. He told the passengers that a member of the flight crew had become unwell and that the plane would be landing sooner than planned as a safety measure. He asked everyone to remain seated with their seatbelts fastened and assured them that the situation was under control. His voice did not shake even once. Many passengers later said that his calm tone was the only thing that kept them from panicking completely. Naila, meanwhile, was walking down the aisle asking passengers quietly, one row at a time, if anyone had medical training or aviation experience. Most people shook their heads. A retired nurse in row 14 offered to help with Bilal, and she moved to kneel beside him, checking his pulse and adjusting the oxygen mask over his face. But Naila needed something more. She needed someone who understood planes, someone who could sit in that empty cockpit seat and help the captain, because flying and landing a large aircraft alone, especially during an emergency, is an enormous task for one person. When Naila reached row 27, she paused. She looked at the quiet woman by the window, the one who had not said a word since boarding, the one with the plain black jacket and the calm, steady eyes. Something about the way this woman was sitting, alert but relaxed, watching everything without fear, made Naila decide to ask her the same question she had asked everyone else. She leaned down gently and said, "Excuse me, I am sorry to bother you, but do you happen to have any flying experience?" Meher Ali looked up at her. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she asked a simple question of her own. "What is wrong with the plane?" Naila explained quickly that the first officer had collapsed and the captain was flying alone. Meher listened carefully, without any panic on her face. Then she nodded once and said, "Take me to him." Naila did not know it yet, but she had just found exactly what the captain needed. Meher stood up from her seat without any hesitation. She did not check her phone. She did not look around at the other passengers. She simply stood, picked up nothing, and walked forward with steady steps. Sarah, the young flight attendant, later said she noticed something strange in the way Meher walked. It was not the walk of someone nervous or unsure. It was the walk of someone who had done something like this before, many times, in situations far more dangerous than this one. They reached the cockpit door. Naila knocked and spoke into the intercom, telling Captain Imran that she had brought a passenger who might be able to help. The door opened. Captain Imran looked at the woman standing there, a stranger in a plain black jacket, and for a brief second he wondered if this was a mistake. But there was something in her eyes, a stillness, a focus, that made him pause. Meher stepped into the cockpit and looked at the instruments immediately. She did not introduce herself first. She did not ask what was happening in a nervous way. She simply asked, "What do you have?" It was not the question of a frightened passenger. It was the question of a pilot. Captain Imran answered quickly. "First officer down, likely a heart problem. I am flying alone. I have already contacted air traffic control and we are heading toward the nearest airport for an emergency landing. I need someone who understands the panel." Meher sat down in the empty right seat without being told to. She put on the headset hanging beside it. She looked over every instrument, the altitude, the speed, the fuel level, the direction, all in a matter of seconds. Then she asked him one more question. "What type of plane rating do you need me to confirm?" Captain Imran told her. She said, "Current," and she said it in a way that told him she was telling the truth. He asked her name. She said, "Meher Ali." He told her his name in return, Imran Sheikh, and said, "Welcome to the right seat. Let us bring this plane down safely." From that moment, the cockpit became a place of quiet, careful teamwork. Captain Imran called out instructions, checking altitude, checking speed, adjusting course toward the new airport. Meher answered every call clearly and quickly, confirming numbers, watching gauges, catching small details before he even had to ask. When a warning light blinked briefly on the control panel, a minor issue with cabin pressure, she noticed it and mentioned it before Imran's eyes had even moved to that part of the panel. He noticed this, and he understood that the woman sitting beside him was not simply someone with basic flying knowledge. She was something far more skilled than that. Air traffic control gave them a new heading and told them the runway was being cleared for their arrival. Emergency vehicles were already lining up along the sides of the airport, red and white lights turning silently in the early morning light. The controller's voice remained steady throughout, giving clear directions, confirming altitude changes, confirming speed. Meher answered on the radio with the same calm clarity as an experienced captain, giving updates on their position and their descent. As they came down through the clouds, Captain Imran felt a strange tightness in his right hand, an old injury from years earlier that sometimes returned under stress. He told Meher honestly. "My hand is not steady enough for the final landing. I want you to take the controls for this last part. I will stay right here and support you the whole time." Meher looked at him for 1 second. She said, "Understood," and placed her hands on the controls. The plane responded to her touch as if it somehow knew her, smooth and steady, the way a machine responds to someone who has flown through much harder situations than this one. She called out the altitude as they descended. She called out the speed. She confirmed the landing gear was down. She confirmed the flaps were set. Captain Imran watched her hands move with complete confidence, no shaking, no hesitation, only calm and careful control. The runway came into view below them, long and clear, with emergency vehicles waiting on both sides. Meher lined the plane up perfectly with the center of the runway. The wheels touched down smoothly, first the back wheels, then the front, with barely a bump felt in the cabin. She slowed the plane carefully, using the brakes and reverse thrust exactly as needed, bringing the large aircraft to a gentle, controlled stop on the runway. For a moment, there was silence in the cockpit. Then Captain Imran let out a long breath and looked over at her. He said nothing at first. He simply reached over and placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, a small gesture that said more than words could. Meher nodded once. That was all. In the cabin, when the passengers realized the plane had landed safely, a wave of relief spread through everyone at once. Some people clapped. Some people cried quietly. The old man in seat 9C closed his eyes and whispered a small prayer of thanks. The woman who had been praying softly during the descent now smiled through her tears. Nobody in the cabin yet knew who had actually landed the plane, but they all felt, somehow, that everything had turned out exactly as it should have. Paramedics rushed onto the plane and carefully carried First Officer Bilal Khan off on a stretcher. He was breathing on his own by then, weak but stable. Doctors later confirmed that he had suffered a serious but treatable heart problem, and with quick treatment, he was expected to make a full recovery within a few weeks. The retired nurse who had helped him during the flight was thanked warmly by his family later that same day. The passengers slowly made their way off the plane, tired but grateful. Most of them still did not fully understand what had happened in the cockpit. They only knew there had been an emergency and that the landing had felt smooth and safe despite everything. Sarah and Nyla, exhausted from the stress of the last hour, stood near the front of the plane and watched the passengers leave, still trying to calm their own racing hearts. Meher Ali walked off the plane like any other passenger, carrying only her small bag. She did not wait to be thanked. She did not look for attention. She simply walked toward the arrival area, planning to quietly disappear into the crowd the way she always had. But word travels fast in the world of aviation, and by the time she reached the terminal, the story of what had happened on Flight AK-209 was already spreading through radio channels and airport offices. Within an hour, senior officials at the airport had heard the details. A passenger with no known airline connection had entered the cockpit during an emergency, had correctly confirmed a valid plane rating, and had personally flown the final approach and landing while the captain managed communication and support beside her. This was not something that happened by accident. Landing a large passenger plane safely, especially during an emergency, required years of serious training that very few people in the world actually had. At the airport, an air marshal named Rashid Beg received a phone call from a colleague who worked in flight operations. The colleague read him a short summary of the event and mentioned the name of the passenger who had helped land the plane, Meher Ali. Air Marshal Beg went very quiet on the phone for a moment. Then he asked only one question. Where is she right now? He had served in the Air Force for over 30 years. He had worked closely with special training programs many years earlier, programs that were never spoken about publicly, programs that trained a small number of pilots to handle situations far beyond normal flying, situations where a single person had to make life or death decisions alone, quickly, and correctly, with no room for mistakes. Only a handful of pilots had ever completed that training. Fewer still had earned the highest mark given at the end of the program. Air Marshal Beg arrived at the airport terminal himself, dressed in plain clothes, not his uniform. He found Meher sitting quietly in the waiting area, drinking a bottle of water, looking tired but calm, the same way she had looked the entire flight. He walked up to her slowly and stood in front of her chair. She looked up at him, not with fear, but with the same steady expression she always carried. He leaned down slightly so that only she could hear him clearly. Then he said one word. Hawk. For a brief second, something changed in Meher's face. It was small, barely visible to anyone else nearby, but Air Marshal Beg noticed it immediately. It was the look of someone hearing a name from a part of their life they had kept locked away for a long time. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again and looked straight at him. She asked quietly, "Who told you that name?" He said simply, "I already know who you are. I was part of the program that trained you." Very few people in the world knew the meaning of that word. It was not written in any public record. It was not part of any regular pilot's file. It belonged only to a small, secret training program that had once trained a handful of pilots to handle the most difficult emergencies imaginable, calmly, quickly, and without any mistake. The program had ended years earlier, but its graduates were never forgotten by the people who had trained them. Only one pilot in the entire history of that program had ever earned the name Hawk, given because her skill and calmness under pressure had gone far beyond anything her instructors had ever seen before. Air Marshal Beg sat down across from her. He told her gently that what she had done that morning had saved every single life on that plane. Meher shook her head slowly and said that the captain deserved the real credit, that she had only assisted him. But Baig had already read the reports. He had already spoken to Captain Imran, who had said clearly and firmly that without Meher Ali in that cockpit, the landing might not have gone so smoothly at all. He asked her one question. When the flight attendant asked if you had flying experience, what were you thinking in that moment? Meher thought about it for a few seconds before answering. She said, I was thinking that someone needed to help, and that I was able to help, so I had to do it. There was nothing more to decide. Baig nodded slowly. He said that was exactly the kind of answer someone with her training would give. Later that afternoon, Captain Imran gave his official statement about the emergency to airport safety officials. He explained everything clearly and honestly, from the moment Bilal collapsed to the final landing. When asked about the passenger who had helped him, he did not hesitate. He said that in over 25 years of flying, he had worked with many skilled pilots, but what he had seen from Meher Ali that day was different. He said her hands moved with a kind of calm confidence that could not be taught quickly. He said clearly that giving her control of the final landing had been his own decision, made because he trusted her completely, and that he would make the exact same decision again if given the same situation. The story of Flight AK-209 slowly moved through aviation circles over the following days. Pilots who heard about it were amazed that a passenger, sitting quietly in economy class with no announcement of who she was, had been able to step into a cockpit during a real emergency and help bring a plane safely to the ground. Many experienced pilots who read the official report said the same thing, that this kind of skill under pressure was extremely rare, something usually seen only in pilots with many years of serious training behind them. In a crew lounge at the airport, a group of senior pilots gathered around a phone screen where someone had pulled up the early details of the incident. They read through it quietly, passing the phone from hand to hand. One of the older captains, a man who had been flying for almost 30 years, put down his cup of tea and asked if anyone in the room knew the name Meher Ali. Nobody answered at first. Then a younger first officer sitting near the back said he had heard the name before, that she had flown small cargo planes years earlier, but he did not know anything about her life before that. Another pilot said quietly that having a valid rating on a large aircraft like that one did not happen without serious training, the kind that usually took years to complete. The older captain looked at the screen for a long moment and said that a passenger simply does not walk into a cockpit during an emergency and land a plane like that without something deeper behind it. The room stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that comes when experienced people understand exactly how difficult something truly is, even if they cannot explain it in simple words. The story also began moving through online pilot groups and aviation forums within a day. Pilots from many different countries wrote about what they had read, and many of them said the same kind of thing in different ways. One captain, who flew large passenger jets in Europe, wrote that people outside the aviation world often did not understand how difficult it was to step into an unfamiliar cockpit in the middle of a real emergency and work smoothly with a captain you have never met before. He wrote that most trained pilots would need time just to get comfortable with a new aircraft and a new crew, let alone fly a clean landing under pressure within minutes. Another experienced flight instructor wrote that what Meher Ali had done was the kind of performance usually seen only during final testing for senior captains, not something expected from an unknown passenger sitting quietly in economy class. News of the landing also reached Bilal Khan's family before he had even fully woken up in the hospital. His mother, who had rushed to the hospital as soon as she heard, later said that when she finally learned the full story, she cried harder than she had when she first heard he had collapsed. She said she did not know the woman's name at first, only that someone on the plane had helped save her son's life along with everyone else on board, and she wished she could thank that person in person one day. The retired nurse who had knelt beside Bilal during the flight, checking his pulse and adjusting his oxygen mask, was also asked later how she felt about everything that had happened. She said she had done what she could with her medical knowledge, but she remembered looking toward the cockpit more than once during those long minutes, hoping whoever was flying the plane knew exactly what they were doing. She said she felt a strange sense of calm return to the cabin a short while after Meher had walked toward the front, even though she did not understand why at the time. Sarah, the young flight attendant who had first found Bilal on the floor of the aisle, said afterward that she thought about that morning almost every day for weeks. She said the moment that stayed with her most was not the landing itself, but the way Meher had stood up from her seat without any hesitation, without checking her phone or looking around for someone to reassure her. She said it was the kind of calm she had never seen in a passenger before, and she doubted she would ever see it again. Meher never gave any long interviews about what happened. When a reporter finally found her a few days later and asked her to describe the experience, she kept her answer very short. She said there had been a problem, and she had been able to help, and that was all that mattered. When asked about her background, she only said, "I am a pilot." When the reporter pushed for more details, she repeated the same simple sentence, calm and final. "I am a pilot. That is the answer." First Officer Bilal Khan recovered well over the following weeks. He later said that he did not remember much from the moment he collapsed until he woke up in the hospital, but he had heard the full story from his colleagues. He said he felt deeply thankful, not just to the doctors who treated him, but to the quiet stranger who had stepped into his seat and helped bring everyone home safely, including himself. Captain Imran Sheikh continued flying, as he always had, but he later said that Flight AK-209 had changed the way he thought about the people around him every single day. He said you never know who is sitting quietly beside you on a plane, and that sometimes, the most important person in an entire emergency is someone nobody expected, someone who never wanted attention in the first place. As for Meher Ali, she picked up her small bag from the waiting area that evening and prepared to continue with her ordinary life, the same quiet life she had always lived since the program had ended years earlier. Before she walked away, Air Marshal Baig asked her if she would consider returning someday, in some capacity, to train new pilots the same way she had once been trained. She thought about it for a long moment before answering. She did not say yes, and she did not say no. She simply said, "I know where to find you," and turned to leave. At the door of the terminal, she paused for a second. Without turning back, she said one more thing to him. "Tell the captain he is a very good pilot. The plane was in good hands." She meant every word of it. And in truth, that morning, on Flight AK-209, high above the clouds with 180 lives depending on quick thinking and steady hands, the plane truly had been in the best hands possible, hands that had once earned a quiet name known only to a few people in the world, a name that meant someone who sees danger before anyone else does, and moves to stop it before anyone else even understands what is happening. She had been sitting in seat 27A the entire time, reading nothing, saying nothing, simply waiting, without knowing it, for the moment she was always ready for.